Well, hi there everyone, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to 2026. This is the first video that I'm filming this year, and so I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and a wonderful New Year, and I hope that the year ahead is a wonderful year for you. My name's Aaron, and on this channel I like to talk about books and bookish things, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. Because what I want to do today is reflect and review on everything I read in 2025. Last year was a good year for reading for me. I'm typically not the quickest reader. I read about 20 to 25 books on average per year. I'm somewhere in that range. And in 2025, I read 26 books. So I'm pretty happy with that. Ultimately, of course, it's not about the volume or the amount that you read, particularly when it comes to nonfiction. It's about what you glean, what you learn, how you grow from what you're reading, and that can be by reading a few books very, very well. Or it can be, for some, reading a wide variety of books on different topics. So overall, I'm happy with what I was able to read last year, and I'm excited to review that. Now, before we get started, I want to make a few notes. First of all, for the purposes of this video, any book that I finished in 2025 is on this list. I may have started it in 2024, but if I finished it in 2025, it's on this list. Secondly, I've organized the books that I've read into different categories, and we'll walk through these different categories together as we go here. That's for a number of reasons. One is that, especially early in the year, I was pretty targeted in what I was reading. I was seeking to grow personally and professionally in various ways. And so I was pretty targeted in the genre, the types of books that I was reading. And so those will be early on in our list. But also, I think I read more widely than I have in other years. Typically, it's just been theology or Christian living that takes up most of my reading. In 2025, I read wider than that. And so I wanted to break it down just for myself, see the different categories or genres that I read, but also for the purposes of organizing this video, to categorize what I read in different genres or different types of books. And so, without further ado, let's get into what I read in 2025. So the first genre or category of books that I read in 2025 are books on productivity. Productivity or business, they might be categorized. And first up here, we have Deep Work by Cal Newport. Cal Newport's a computer scientist who's very much in the productivity sphere in his writing, his podcast as well. And he's really become known as the deep work guy. In fact, other productivity people, when they reference deep work, they right away reference Cal Newport. And those ideas he speaks about in this book. His main point is that in a knowledge-based economy, the ability to focus well is a superpower that will lead to success. And so he unpacks why that's the case. He deals with things like the ability to develop a craft well. And then the second part of the book, he offers advice on how to develop, how to foster the ability to focus, how to work deeply, steps you can take to do that. If you're in the knowledge work sector, or if you do any studying or anything, any work with your mind, this is a great book, a must-read book, I would say. In a similar vein, the second book we have is At Your Best by Carey Nieuwhof. Carey Nieuwhof is a former pastor, a church planter and pastor who now runs a business and is a successful podcaster, does a podcast on leadership. And in this book, what Newhoff does is he begins by telling his story of burning out, and then how he discovered to live and work at a better pace. And so in some ways he builds off of Cal Newport's work in deep work, but Newhoff's main contention is that not only do we have to learn how to manage our time, we have to learn how to manage our energy. We have to know ourselves well enough to know when we work at our highest capacity, when we're dealing with fatigue and can't work as well. And so he offers advice like figure that out and then do your most important, your most meaningful work when you're at your best, and do more menial or less important tasks when you're hitting those slumps. Helpful book as well. I like the idea of managing your energy, and so this was a good read for this past year as well. And then last, in the productivity section, a bit of a different book, a book called Crucial Conversations. Crucial conversation is basically any high stakes conversation you might have, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in the home or in a marriage or among friends. And what the authors of this book do is they seek to coach the reader through how to navigate conversations that are high stakes or that are already tense. They talk about things like making sure that in the conversation you're conducting yourself so that it's safe for someone else to contribute, or so that that person feels the ability, the safety to be able to contribute. It was a helpful book. They have nice steps laid out, a little gimmicky I found. Every time Crucial Conversations comes up in the text of the book, it's capitalized. They have really built a business and curriculum and training around this. So in that sense, it makes sense. But a helpful book. It offered some helpful advice in terms of conversations and how to navigate what can be tense conversations. The next category of books that I read in 2025 were books on pastoral ministry. And kicking off this section is this book right here, The Contemplative Pastor by Eugene Peterson. First of all, man, can Peterson write? This book was wonderfully written. His prose are beautiful and moving. He writes with this poetic flair that just makes it a joy to read. Just from the reading perspective, this was wonderful. But he offered some really helpful advice that I needed. For example, one piece of advice he offers is that pastors should use their calendars and in particular, scheduled prayer time. He basically says pastors have prayer scheduled on your calendar and guard that as you would any other appointment because prayer is so necessary for your soul. He had a wonderful chapter on what he calls the ministry of small talk, where he's basically arguing that pastors need to relate and know their people. They need to not always be in this heady space where they're thinking about theology and thinking about the Bible at a high level, but they need to come and meet their people where their people are at and get to know them. These are things that I needed to hear and that I needed to read and that are sticking with me to this day. Secondly, the second book in this category I read is The Unhurried Pastor by Ronnie Martin and Brian Croft. What it seemed these authors were trying to do is really take Eugene Peterson and repackage him for a modern audience. And honestly, this one fell a little flat. I don't think it quite accomplished what they were hoping for. One of the authors used humor too frequently, humor that fell flat. He used illustrations that didn't quite effectively communicate his point. And Brian Croft's section, although very good, is really a rehashing of other things that he's written. I don't want to disparage Brian Croft's work. He's written some really helpful things. He does a really helpful podcast called Trench Talk. If you're a pastor, I highly recommend you look that up. But my recommendation would be read Peterson, enjoy Peterson, be challenged by Peterson, and then read some of Brian Croft's other books. The Pastor's Soul, The Pastor's Ministry, The Pastor's Family are three very good books, very helpful, practical books that he's written that I think will be a great help and great benefit to you as opposed to reading this one. Didn't quite do what I was hoping that it would do. Moving on, one that did do what I hoped it would do is this book right here, Preaching and Preachers by the one and the only Martin Lloyd-Jones. I did a review, video review of this book on my channel earlier this year. I'll drop a link in the description box below. You can check that out. But very good, very helpful, very challenging, very thought-provoking. If you preach even semi-regularly, if you're thinking about preaching and ministry, Lloyd-Jones is a must-read. Go grab it, go read. Last, but certainly not least, in this book on this section on pastoral ministry is Brothers, We Are Not Professionals by John Piper. John Piper just feeds my soul. And when I realized I had this book and that I was on pastoral ministry, I picked it up and I read. It is very good, very challenging again, as Piper always is. He's convicting. What he's basically arguing in this book is that pastoral ministry has really come to be seen like any other profession. It's been professionalized. And what he urges instead is that pastors see their main job, their main role as caring for the souls of their people and caring for their own soul. And he discusses that in various practical ways. He urges pastors to be reading and to be reading biography and church history, to be feeding their souls in that way. He urges pastors to continue to be familiar with the original languages of the Old and New Testament so that they can accurately communicate God's word to his people. He urges pastors to be bold in speaking on social issues like racism, like abortion, and he really encourages pastors to, in their churches, foster a greater vision, a bigger vision for global missions. Beautiful book, wonderful read. If you are a pastor, I would say this is a must-read book. Carrying on with the John Piper theme, we'll move into what we can categorize as Christian living. And the first book in this category is Desiring God by John Piper. This is one of those books that I've owned for years and numerous times said, I gotta read Desiring God by John Piper. And I never did until this past year, until 2025. It was a book that my counselor had recommended a number of times, and eventually I got the hint and picked it up and started reading. And again, Piper is just soul-feeding. He is convicting. This book, Desiring God, really develops Piper's main idea of Christian hedonism, that God is most satisfied, or God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. And so it's really his first go at developing this idea that we find our happiness, our joy in glorifying God. And when we find our joy in glorifying God, God receives more glory. that serving God isn't just drudgery, but God has designed our obedience, our following his ways for us as a way for us to experience joy. Really good book, really convicting, a lot to just read and reflect on. John Piper's Desiring God. Pick up and read if you haven't yet. And then the last John Piper book that I read this past year is this one right here, which I can't read the title. Good News of Great Joy, Advent Devotions. In 2024, my wife and I decided we wanted to start a tradition of leading up to Christmas, buying a book of devotions dealing with Advent. And this was the first book that we picked up. And so we began it in 2024. We finished it in 2025. And it is what you would expect of Piper. A big vision of God, over and over again, beautifully setting before us the wonder and glory of God and calling us to feast on that. Great read. Next Christmas, pick this book up. The third book in this category, shifting gears a fair bit, is Family Shepherds by Vodi Bakum. Now, I want to start off by saying I've listened to a number of sermons by Vodi Bakum. I've heard him preach live once at a Gospel Coalition conference. And man, was he a gifted preacher. I loved his sermons, challenging, bold, bringing the gospel clearly. I was really saddened to learn of his passing in 2025, in the fall of 2025. He was such a wonderful pastor and teacher. That being said, this book was a bit of a disappointment. He has wonderful things to say. His chapter on parenting was really helpful. His concluding chapter on, well, let me see my notes here. His concluding chapter on evaluating their lifestyle in order to foster spiritual nurture and care in their families was just wonderful. But this was a book that left me wanting more. For example, when he deals with the topic of male headship in the home, he spends most of that chapter trying to debunk the arguments that theological feminism has leveled against passages like Ephesians 5. And it left me wondering, well, how can I be a faithful head? You've told me what not to do. You haven't told me what to do. And some other sections of this book take this very polemical approach, kind of arguing against what he sees as wrong, but not really constructively building or constructively telling the reader what he should do, what a good way forward is. So some helpful things, but it wasn't my favorite. And then last in this Christian living section is J. Curve, Dying and Rising with Christ in Everyday Life by Paul E. Miller. I also did a video review of this book. You can check that out. It came to me in a time when I needed it, when things were tough, I was struggling, and this book was really a godsend. That's all I'll say. I'll link that video in the description below as well. All right, moving on. The next category is books on counseling. This could be seen as a subset of Christian living, but we'll give it its own category because there were a number of books specifically on that I read in 2025. The first of those was this book right here, Understanding Trauma by Dr. Stephen Midgley. For background, in 2024, I began reading a bit on trauma, trying to understand it. The biggest book I read was Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And in 2025, I continued reading on the theme of trauma. And this was the first book that I picked up and read in 2025, dealing with trauma. And it is a wonderful book. Dr. Midgley writes with such concern and tenderness towards those who are suffering, those who are dealing with trauma, and yet he writes with such a zeal for those in churches to better understand and be able to better love and care for those who have gone through trauma. He spends some time looking at, we might say, the secular psychological views of trauma, evaluating those and offering biblical insight into it, and then really giving practical advice for churches, how churches can create an environment that cares for those who are dealing with severe trauma. If you are a church leader, a pastor, an elder, a ministry leader, please read this book. Please get a hold of it and read it. It is very helpful, a very necessary book for churches to have and to read. Second, also dealing on the theme of trauma, was this book right here, I Have PTSD by Curtis Solomon. This one was a little less helpful. It's very much from the biblical counseling world, which I don't have a problem with that at all. But the author sometimes gets dangerously close, if not enters the read your Bible and pray and things will get better mode. I think he would acknowledge that trauma is more complex than that. He has some very helpful worksheets, exercises, but it wasn't as robust, wasn't as helpful as I thought it might be. The third book I read on the theme of counseling, I don't have my copy with me right now, but it was Saints, Sufferers, and Sinners by Michael Emlet. Again, I did a video review of this. I'll link that down below. Another book that if you are a pastor, an elder, ministry leader, a very helpful book to read as Emlet navigates or gives help in navigating how you talk, how to have discussions with people in different places in their lives. Finally, the fourth book that I read, that I'm calling this a counseling book. My counselor recommended it to me. Thankfully, I owned it. Another book that I've had for years and numerous times thought I should read that book. My counselor finally gave me the kick in the pants I needed to read it. This book right here, A Sacred Sorrow by Michael Card. This helped me think through lament. It was a tough year. There were a lot of difficult things going on for me and my family in 2025. And this just gave permission to lament. Again, another video. I did another video on this. Link that below. But if you want to learn about biblical lament, read A Sacred Sorrow by Michael Card.